Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 11th meeting of the Comox Valley Sewage Commission. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. I'd like to welcome all the directors who are here in the CVRD boardroom, with the exception of Captain who is joining us from CFB Comox on Zoom, and welcome to Chris and Reed, who I also see out there on Zoom. And we'll start the meeting today with the resolution status report from June of 2024. A motion for receipt, please. Moved by Grant, seconded by Swift. Is there any discussion? Is there anyone opposed? That's carried. And we'll move into the Sewage Management Advisory Committee minutes dated May 30th. A motion for receipt, please. Moved by Grant, seconded by Swift. Any discussion? Is there anyone opposed to receipt? That's carried. Thank you. And item 2 on our agenda is the Integrated Energy Audit results for the Comox Valley Water Pollution Control Center and Compost Facility. A report dated June 5th. The motion for receipt, please. Moved by Grant, seconded by McCollum. Thanks very much, and over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to the commission members. Chris LaRose will be introducing this staff report. Chris is our Senior Manager of Water and Wastewater Services. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, James, and through the chair, good afternoon, everyone. So this report presents a summary of the attached energy audit performed for the Comox Valley Water Pollution Control Center and our composting facility, with 50% funding from BC Hydro. So the audit identified and measured sources of greenhouse gas emissions at each of these facilities, and it identified a number of energy conservation measures, or ECMs as they're referred to in the report and attachment, so measures that could be pursued to reduce emissions from our operations and towards the compliance with the Corporate Energy and Emissions Program plan. So the ECM were assessed and prioritized based on the scale of emissions avoided, the cost of achieving the reductions, and several other metrics. Most of the ECMs identified through the audit will be actioned at the staff level, so without needing external resources. But three of the most complex ECMs have been recommended for more detailed feasibility studies, and those being high efficiency lighting and control upgrades, wastewater heat recovery to displace the natural gas that's currently used to heat our facilities, or heat the treatment plant specifically, and the third one being biofilter fan optimization at the compost facility. So should the commission support the staff recommendation, then applications will be made to BC Hydro to hopefully fund 50% of the feasibility, the cost of undertaking the feasibility studies for these ECMs, energy conservation measures. And we're hoping to have that complete in time that we can embed those costs within, hoping to have those completed in time so we can embed the results of that feasibility studies or the kind of projects in the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And finally, in parallel with the feasibility study, if we do go this route, staff will be exploring how best to compare emission reduction projects between departments and whether and how to focus resources on the highest priority projects to minimize or to maximize the efficiency of the SEEP implementation corporately across the corporation, not just by department. So that's it for me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. Director Grant, was there any of that you wanted repeated? There was some sound problems.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks very much. Questions or comments from commissioners? Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Chris. There's a lot of good policy here, and I really appreciate the report. I had, I guess, one question sort of foundationally, which is that I think it says that fugitive emissions are not considered as part of the emissions reduction program, part of SEEP. And there's a pie chart on, I think it's page 23 of the appendix, which shows that the fugitive emissions of nitrous oxide and and methane are 78% of the emissions that we experience from these facilities. So I guess one of my challenges is I guess is wondering if there's a plan for addressing those, which are obviously the overwhelming majority of the actual emissions, and if not, if that's something that this body needs to consider.
Sure. Yeah. So my understanding of the SEEP is that fugitive emissions are not currently being not part of the targeted emissions reductions by the 2030 and 2050 targets. That being said, we are being asked to track those emissions. So we are just embarking on the site master planning, finalization of the site master planning process for this service. Doing a lot of work this month. We have a 2-day workshop next week to kick off that process. And part of the scope that we've embedded for the engineering consultants helping to guide that process is to undertake a detailed assessment or inventory of our fugitive process emissions from the facility, with the intention to have those results kind of modeled for each of the options being considered for upgrade kind of programs or upgrade options for that facility, with the aim of having that as one of the selection criteria for determining the best path forward for that facility.
Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that's good. That's good to be hearing that. I know that, and I guess I know that the solid waste service, we do consider fugitive emissions because they're the overwhelming majority there of the GHGs. And I had not appreciated until I read this report that the SEEP does not include that. So I mean, you can only follow the SEEP, and that's the scope that it has. Are there technologies available which would help us address the fugitive emissions from the waste treatment plant?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I should have noted this in response to your first question. The estimate provided by the consultants in their audit were not based on a specific analysis of our process. So the work that we are kicking off right now with Carollo on the site master plan will be tailored and kind of actually assess and estimate the emissions from our specific treatment process. So those emissions are very specific to the performance, the treatment technology and performance of a specific facility. So they do need a much more in-depth assessment than was provided by these consultants who were not focused on providing that assessment. So that number, I wouldn't put much, if any, kind of faith in that quantity. We suspect it to be quite a bit lower. So there will always be some, for activated sludge kind of treatment technology like that we have at our facility, there will always be some emissions, but there are decisions that we can make. And like I said, we do plan to assess that and make decisions on how to upgrade our facility over the coming decades, in part based on the emissions profile of the facility.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And do I take it from that there are technologies available to address fugitive emissions sort of in the industry? Is that something that you're aware of?
Well, so we do capture, our odor control system is a convenient kind of aggregation of the flows. So the bioreactors are now covered since 2018 as our last phase of odor upgrades at the facility. So that does provide a potential solution for treating because it's a NOx type of emissions that are the kind of at issue with the process. So I think it's possible that there could be some treatment mechanism to treat the air the gas being withdrawn from the top of those tanks. So it's certainly something we can look at. But I think more significantly, it would be tweaks to the treatment process itself rather than treatment of the gases that come off of the tanks. That would be our focus.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'd possibly have one or two more questions, but I'll surrender the floor now.
Well, you have the floor and nobody else is asking for it, so carry on.
I'm obviously want us to get the best bang for our buck, and we're going to be spending money to implement this plan. And it doesn't, I couldn't find there necessarily indications of how much greenhouse gas emissions reductions we'd receive for each of the changes that are proposed there. Might it behoove us, I love that word, might it behoove us to have this report come back when we have and have an initial analysis of what it might take in terms of expense to address the the large amount of fugitive emissions. And then we can compare that to what's being proposed here to make sure that we're using the funds that we have as effectively as we can to achieve the objectives that we've set out for ourselves. And I'm just wondering if we were to refer it back to staff for analysis of that sort, what sort of time frame you think that might be?
I suggest, so what's being proposed here is a feasibility study with funding from BC Hydro. So what I suggest is that we complete the feasibility study, have the results of that work in hand around the time we have the work that we're initiating right now for the site master planning work. And then, before we bring back any recommendations on how to proceed and spend actual money on upgrades, we can have the results of both of those analysis in hand. So that's kind of the approach that we've set in motion here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be like a two-track process. There'd be the feasibility study that is referred to here, and a separate study which would look at ways of addressing fugitive emissions. And when both are complete, we could assess them in relation to each other, see which is the most cost effective, and then sort of choose the actual path forward. Is that kind of a way would that be kind of the timeline that would make sense?
That's what we've set in motion here. Yeah. So we will have the results of both of these pieces of work in hand before any decisions are being recommended, or before any next steps are recommended to the
Okay.
commission.
Well, thanks for clarifying that second piece. I hadn't realized that a fugitive emission study was something that we will see at the same time as the feasibility study coming back. So that knowing that gives me that's just a really helpful piece of information. Great. Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
Thanks. And James Warren would like to add something.
Thanks. Just maybe to build on that, and I think what you're identifying, or what I'm hearing be identified, is there's a bigger picture to be looked at here, and not just within the sewage service in this case, but also in our other services. And as a corporation, what are those? Where are those emissions? Where are those investments to see reductions? And how best do we approach applying the SEEP overall? We are learning more and more about the energy and emissions and opportunities for reductions in GHG emissions with every bit of work that we do around the SEEP. So part of what we're also committed to come back to will be a more broad assessment and understanding of GHG emissions and the corporate responsibilities overall. So I think it's building on what you've been asking about in terms of that bigger picture. So there is more work being done, and not just within the sewage service, but looking at our financial planning process and making sure those decisions that you're making, you being Sewage Commission, Water Committee, the board overall, are taking into account all of these different competing interests.
Thanks. And we'll go to Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering, when the report comes back, can you tell me what difference this is going to make in the valley in general? Like, I don't know what percentage the RD is of the valley's emissions. Like, if we're 50% and we do this, that might make some difference. If we're 0.5% and we do it, then maybe we should wonder what we're doing it for at all. So, we keep comparing it to our own corporate emissions, but that doesn't mean anything unless we know how much that's going to reduce it, at least in the valley.
So I don't know if the work that Chris is working on would give you those kinds of answers, but certainly the climate action strategy that is underway and that is coming back to the board will speak to the more broad community emissions and community impacts. I think from a corporate perspective, these are investments and activities that the CBRD can make and then have some effect and instigate some change. And that's the direction that the board has put in front of us by adopting the SEEP and by setting these targets in place. So we are trying to provide as much of a big picture as possible, recognizing that the board set the corporate energy emissions plan in play.
Thanks for that. Director Cole-Hamilton, did you have any other points? Okay. Chris, any final comments?
Nope, all good on my end. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much for that useful discussion. We are on receipt. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that's carried. And the recommendation is that staff be directed to complete an application to BC Hydro for funding an integrated feasibility study for the Comox Valley Water Pollution Control Center that includes lighting and control upgrades and replacement of the natural gas heating system. And further, that the other energy conservation measures that as identified within the integrated energy audit are progressed per the proposed path forward as detailed within table 1 of the staff report dated June 5th, 2024. Moved by McCollum and seconded by Cole Hamilton. Is there further discussion? Okay, is there anyone opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, that's carried. And we'll move on to item number 3, Sandy Dump update, a report dated June the 6th for receipt, a motion for receipt, please. Moved by Grant, seconded by Kerr. And over to staff.
And Chris, returning this one over to you as well. Sorry, I thought we were moving on to another item, but Chris, to the Sandy Dump update.
Okay, thanks, James, and through the chair. So at the April 9th meeting of the commission, staff were directed to defer further work on a regional Sandy Dump station until the city of Courtenay confirmed support and capacity to assess the Dove Creek Place site, or the city and town identified another site. And a letter was sent shortly after the meeting to this effect. Since then, the letters attached to this report were received from the city and the town. Courtenay indicated that they did not support further exploration of the Dove Creek site. And the town of Comox indicated that that they felt that the process had exhausted any potential sites within the town of Comox, but did support the overall process. And the city also highlighted that they would be able to allocate capacity to assess other sites come the fall of this year. At the May 30th commission at the advisory committee, staff raised the prospect of hiring a consultant to help guide the process, and this was supported by municipal staff. The concept would be the consultant would review the site assessments that have been completed to date, conduct a review to potentially identify other sites, and also in parallel with that could support the CVRD in developing and delivering a process for incentivizing the private sector to step up and provide the service. Should the commission support this direction, staff will develop a scope, work with municipal staff to have their review and input, and aim for awarding the work by fall of 2024 when the municipalities have allocated staff capacity to help support the process. We believe the results of this work will better position the commission to consider whether other services or entities could be involved in delivering or funding such a facility in the Comox Valley.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for bringing this forward. Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have any problem looking around to see, but I thought, I'm not sure what the rationale was for not following the Dove Creek one. I thought that it was because they didn't have enough capacity at staff to be able to look into it. And maybe I'm just forgetting why that got nixed, but that would be good to know.
Well, Chris, it's maybe a bit unfair to ask you to speak on that. I don't mind sharing that Courtenay staff felt that there were issues with that location, including the access to the private property challenges those homeowners have presented unrelated to this. The open ditches along there and the types of approvals that would be required. And they also had some concerns about some of the queuing aspects related to the traffic in that area. I don't know if other Courtenay directors have any other recollections about that, but that's basically. On your mic, please.
Sorry, I never heard that before, so I thought it was just a timing issue. So that's better to know. Thank you.
Yeah, the timing was related to the possibility of looking at other sites in the interim. So, but I think there's a commitment to work together come fall, and So hopefully, with all of that, we will see the end of this at some point. Director Swift.
Thank you. Chris, what kind of a budget would you anticipate for hiring a consultant?
That's a good question. We don't view it as it's not a huge piece of work. But I would expect, we'd be on the order of between 20 and 40,000. So we do have allowances for professional fees within the service, which is why we haven't brought forward a proposed budget amendment to fund that work. So the proposal would be to fund that work out of existing allowances. Yeah.
Director McCollum.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I completely understand, the rationale here and why we've arrived at this place. We basically have a challenge with, citing this, and, we're looking for a resolution, and, there's a variety of, jurisdictional questions, in terms of location and also like where in our community this service belongs, or providing this facility belongs. And so it's sitting at this table right now, but I think there has been some concern already expressed as to whether or not it makes sense that it's essentially a Courtney Comox responsibility, when it, to me, this is probably more related to a tourism function, either our RV residents going and being tourists or tourists visiting our community. So there's that. And then the other concern that I have is, I think when we were first receiving the staff report around the Dove Creek location, before we'd heard from our city staff, I think we heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, but I thought we were talking about maybe 20 to 40,000 for installing the facility. And now we don't have a site location that is viable at this point. And now we're talking about hiring a consultant for the same amount of money before we have any service available. And I'm concerned that we haven't truly addressed whether or not we'd like to see the sewer service fund something that could potentially become a lot more costly than what we were previously thinking, certainly a lot more costly than what Cumberland has effectively turned off for the time being. And so I guess I have two concerns, is that I'm not fully understanding what the potential cost impact is. And I'm also not completely in support of this just being the responsibility of the sewer service. It's related to sewer, but I don't think that it really is something that needs to be provided simply because that we have a wastewater treatment plant that's supported by the two municipalities in the service. But maybe you want to correct me if I'm wrong about what we initially heard about the cost of developing a site on Dove Creek Road. Am I right about the pricing?
So we've explored to a fair level of depth a couple of different spots. So the most detailed cost estimate that we developed was for a potential site on Ryan Road, and that one was approximately just over $200,000. When we approached Dove Creek, it was for a potentially a simpler site, and we were estimating about $100,000 for filling in the ditch, extending the utilities, dropping the power. So it is a fairly simple. It could be a fairly simple facility. So you're right. Proceeding with something like a $30,000 consulting scope to help us advance a facility that could be not much more than that in capital cost. But I think what we've demonstrated with this process is that, as you've highlighted, siting is the major issue, and our hope is that having the third party kind of help guide that process and provide a third party kind of conclusion at the end of it could help the decision making process. And as we've highlighted in the report, in my synopsis, I think we'll be in a better position. That's right. One last piece there. That scope will also include developing a better detail on potential cost estimates. what we've highlighted is that we'll, with this work complete, we'll be in a better position. We'll have a better idea of the cost. We'll have a better idea of the siting challenges, and we'll have a better place to have those conversations potentially with other services or entities involved in potentially sharing in the funding or delivering such a facility.
Thanks. Okay, thanks very much. Any further comments or questions from commission members? All right, seeing none, we are in receipt. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? That is approved. And we have a recommendation that the Comox Valley Regional District staff be directed to engage a consultant to identify and assess potential public sandy dump sites, support staff development and delivery of competitive process for incentivizing and identifying and assessing potential private sandy dump sites, and support staff and sewage commission in selection of an optimal site for implementation by summer of 2025. Would someone like to move that, please? Moved by Grant and seconded by Swift. Further discussion? All right, all those in favor? And are there any opposed? It looks like with some reluctance on the part of some that is carried. Thanks very much. And Captain Uhm, I'm assuming that if you're opposed to anything, you'll certainly let us know as you always do. So thank you for that.
Oh, we will do. Thank you.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks. All right. We do have an in-camera recommendation that we adjourn to in-camera pursuant to subsection 90 of the community charter, 91E and 91K. Moved by Grant, seconded by Cole Hamilton. All in favor? That's carried. We'll move in camera and we'll ask staff to secure the room for that purpose, please.